This is Dr. Emily with Owl Chiropractic. Today we are talking about aligned nutrition, how to make simple shifts in your diet for big impact on your health. You may be asking why a chiropractor is talking about nutrition. Chiropractors are concerned about the function of our nervous system. There are three things that can impact the function of our nervous system. We refer to them as the three T's: thoughts, traumas, and toxins. Nutrition falls under toxins, the things that we put into our bodies or on our bodies that can impact the function of the nervous system. In our office, we utilize infrared thermography to evaluate the function of a nervous system. In the case study shown here, the images on the right show a very unhappy nervous system. The image on the far left shows a much happier nervous system. Right? These scans are from a 33-year-old female that had a very similar pattern, the ones on the right, every time she came in for her adjustment. One day, it looked much better. I asked her what she changed, what happened, something's different. She said that she had started eating better. We've seen this multiple times over the years, and it always comes down to thoughts, traumas, and toxins. When we clean up the toxins, when we clean up our nutrition, our nervous system can start functioning better. You may be wondering, along with most people, why nutrition has become so complicated, right? Unfortunately, it boils down to money. A large majority of nutritional studies are funded by the companies who have a financial interest in the outcome. Doesn't sound like such a good study, right? Supplements and diets that have products, thinking about Weight Watchers, Optavia, things like that, they're also looking to make a profit. Another leg of it is that for many years, the government has subsidized corn and soy with our taxpayer dollars to make vegetable oils cheaper. And therefore, the products that contain them are also cheaper. Vegetable oils are not healthy to consume. We'll get into this a little bit later, but they increase the inflammation in our body. So we shouldn't be consuming them. Nutrition doesn't have to be complicated. I'm going to outline the basics of a healthy diet in this presentation today. If you follow those, you're bound to see your health improve. I first want to start by making a statement that nutrition is more than just weight loss. Most people who start getting concerned about nutrition want to lose weight, and that's fantastic. Being overweight isn't healthy. It's associated with an increase in risk of diseases. However, just because you're of a normal weight doesn't mean you're healthy, doesn't mean you need to look at your nutrition and evaluate it. Nutrition plays an important part in our hormones, our detoxification, and all the pathways in our body. Studies have proven that nutrition can impact the following issues: obesity, heart disease, PCOS, depression, anxiety, ADD, ADHD, gas, bloating, difficulty getting to sleep, difficulty staying asleep, chronic pain, IBS, diverticulosis, endometriosis, PMS, symptoms, infertility, allergies, headaches, frequently getting sick, acid reflux, gallstones, diabetes, acne, eczema, hair loss and quality, nail quality, osteoporosis, and so much more. A lot of these conditions have unfortunately become common, but they are not normal. They're all signs that nutrition could be having a negative impact on your health. I also bet you didn't expect to see this poop emoji today, right? But poop can be important. Did you know you're supposed to be pooping 1 to 2 times every single day? That is shocking to a lot of people, right? So within a 24 hours, you should pass 12 inches of medium firm sausage-like poop, right? Your stool is a good indicator of how well your digestive tract is working, what your gut and microbiome health are like, your toxicity load, and the quality of the food you're consuming. I encourage you to look up Bristol stool chart and dive into that a little bit more, especially if you are not as regular as I'm saying you should be. All right, and now we're getting into the missing key, the main part of today's talk. Poor nutrition causes inflammation in the body through something we call leaky gut syndrome. Poor nutrition leads to damaged gut lining, which allows things that aren't meant to be in your bloodstream to get through that barrier. Your body then fires up antibodies, which can damage healthy tissues and cause inflammation. When we have chronic inflammation from leaky gut, we have energy loss, and the body struggles to process the foods that we eat. This starts to snowball and cause lots of issues, kind of like the ones I mentioned 2 slides back, in the body. Inflammation is the root cause of dis-ease and disease in the body. And this is the real reason, the key reason you should be eating healthy. I'm a huge fan of what I call the KISS principle. It stands for Keep It Simple, Silly. By following the advice in this presentation, it's going to help you turn the tables against inflammation in your body. I encourage you to really take these basics of nutrition and implement them consistently, right? You don't need to count calories or macros or drink magic shakes or down a lot of pills and supplements, especially if you are not implementing these basics of nutrition. Any diet that takes you away from these basics is not healthy and should be avoided. A note on supplements. The supplement industry is not regulated, meaning that what they say is in the bottle doesn't have to be in the bottle. You should also make sure that you're doing some testing and monitoring your levels of the different supplements you're taking. Deficiencies can be bad for you, but so can too much of a supplement, right? It's going to vary between the different supplements and vitamins, but I encourage you to get tested and make sure that you're not just supplementing something that you don't need or causing overload in your body. You cannot out-supplement a poor diet. So again, do the basics first. And that's not to say that supplements don't have their place and they've helped people and I've seen it turn people's lives around. But again, those people were also implementing these basics of nutrition. The vast majority of your diet should be minimally processed or non-processed foods. They should be whole foods that came from the dirt or an animal. Most of these existed prior to the 1980s, right? Packaged and processed foods are something that were invented not that long ago when you consider all of human history. These packaged and processed foods don't contain the naturally occurring nutrient combinations that help keep our body's hunger hormones in check. They'll create nutrient deficiencies even if they say that they've been fortified with vitamins and nutrients and minerals. I do realize, however, that eating only whole foods becomes a little bit of an issue or takes a lot of effort, right? So I do want to teach you how to read a food label, okay? The first thing I want you to understand is that marketing is used to sell food and not help us stay healthy, okay? So when you're looking at food labels, you want to understand that the following do not make a product healthy. If it says sugar-free, zero sugar, gluten-free, organic, fat-free, heart healthy, low calorie, natural, healthy, any of those types of things doesn't mean it's bad for you, but it also does not mean it's good for you. So we have to learn how to read the food label. There are 3 main things I want you to assess when you're looking at a food label. The first one is the ingredient list. This should be really short. The longer the ingredient list, the more likely there's a bunch of chemicals and preservatives and processed things in there that we don't want to eat. The second thing is to make sure that you can pronounce and know what each ingredient is. Again, for the most part, complicated words or things you've never heard of are things you don't want to be consuming. The third thing I want you to look at is the amount of sugar. There should be 5 grams or less of added sugar in the product if you're going to eat it. I also want you to take a note, and if you see any of the following, natural flavors, artificial colors, phosphates, nitrates, or seed oils, and these are canola and vegetable, I want you to try and avoid those, right? Those are really bad and will increase a lot of inflammation in your body, and avoiding those would be good for your health. Remember, you shouldn't be eating a ton of foods that come with food labels to begin with, but I realize it's unavoidable for most people, and so we're going to learn how to read those together. All right, so this first food label that we're looking at is for yogurt. On the left-hand side, I want you to notice the blue circle that says low-fat yogurt, right? Doesn't necessarily mean it's good for us. We're going to learn later that we actually want to avoid things that are promoting low fat, okay? And it even says it has vitamin A and D. Are those added? Are they naturally occurring? We're not sure, but it's telling us it's 99% fat-free. Again, doesn't necessarily mean it's good for us. When we look at the ingredient list on the right-hand side, we're seeing things like sugar, pretty high up there, modified cornstarch, natural flavor, tricalcium phosphate, colored with carmine and annatto extract from, things that aren't necessarily good, things we wouldn't want to be eating by themselves, right? So the ingredient list is a little long, has probably not some good things in there. And then we're looking at the sugar level. 26 grams of sugar. Look at that yellow highlight, right? This is not a very healthy choice. Continuing on with our yogurt theme, we're evaluating just the ingredient list here. On the left-hand side, number 1, we have just some plain Greek yogurt. When we look at the ingredient list, we see cultured milk, right? And then some very long things. We're not too sure what those are, right? And then when we look at the second option, okay, Chobani, Greek yogurt, vanilla, looks a little fancier. Probably, does that make it healthier? We don't know. Cultured non-fat milk, cane sugar, water, fruit pectin, natural flavors. Okay, those are some things we're not too excited about. And then the third option, Chobani zero sugar, right? It's got some ultra-filtered non-fat milk, some water, some skim milk, right? And then a much, much longer ingredient list. So, if we evaluate these side by side, we're going to want to go with option 1, okay? So this uses whole milk, which is really good. And then it also has, like I mentioned, some words that we can't really pronounce. We probably don't know what they are. But if we look closely, it's telling us it's live and active cultures in the milk, right? So those are actually really good for your gut health. Okay, and they all contain those because they're all yogurt. So that makes option 1 the best choice. While option 2 looks fancier, it contains non-fat milk and added cane sugar and more ingredients, right? And then option 3 tries to fool us because it's claiming there's zero sugar on it, but there's a long list of bad ingredients. So out of these 3, I would want to choose option number 1 as the most healthy. All right, our third and final food label quiz that we're looking at here are comparing 2 food labels, and which one are we going to choose? So on the left-hand side, we're looking at the sugar content, 22 grams of sugar. Well, that's pretty high, right? And we're looking at the ingredient list. So it seems pretty short, but it's starting out with sugar. That means sugar is the highest content of the food product. It's got non-fat milk. We want to try and avoid that. Palm kernel oil, that's a vegetable oil. We want to avoid that. Okay, well, let's look at the second item here. Again, looking at the sugar content, 20 grams of sugar, 17 grams of added sugar. Okay, well, that's technically less than the other one. And the ingredient list, again, is not crazy long, but let's look at it a little bit closer. It's got cane sugar syrup, canola oil, right? More cane sugar. All right, so honestly, which one would you choose? All right, so I tried to trick you here, right? Neither of these are a good option. My point here is, though, that while both food labels contained around 200 calories, around 20 grams of sugar, and 4 grams of protein, one is a candy bar and one is a fig bar, right? How many people probably eat this for breakfast, right? Even at breakfast spreads, you'll see, fig bars out. If you're eating fig bars for breakfast, you might as well be eating a candy bar, at least if you're eating this fig bar, right? So you want to make sure you evaluate your food labels. And again, just because it says Nature's Bakery, right, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's healthy for you or a good choice to make. All right, so now we're going to get into really understanding the different types of foods, and I'm going to be telling you, what you should be eating a lot of, what you should be monitoring, what you should be avoiding. And we're going to start with protein, because protein is king. It helps us build muscles and gives us energy, and it helps keep us fuller longer. It helps keep us satiated. Every meal and snack that we eat, we should be consuming about 20 to 30 grams of protein. For a typical meat, this is going to be about a palm full-sized portion. We should be aiming to consume 1 to 1.25 grams per pound of lean body weight per day in protein, right? So for the average adult, that should be around 150 grams of protein. I encourage you to keep a log and try and track how much protein you're consuming. It's probably a lot less than this. I do want to make 2 side notes on protein. The first one is in regards to nut butter. Right? A lot of people want to eat a lot of peanut butter and say they're eating lots of protein. Unfortunately, nut butters are more fat than protein, and they're usually made from a quality of nut that's really poor. Right? It's often moldy, and it increases inflammation in the body. Right? There's also usually a lot of added oils, vegetable oils, which we know aren't healthy, and it's really easy to overconsume calories in nut butters. Right? I don't know about you, but I could put down a couple spoonfuls of peanut butter very easily, right? So when it comes to nut butters or nuts in general, it's better to opt for a whole nut that's unroasted and unsalted. My second big note on protein is that despite propaganda, eating vegetarian and vegan is not healthier than a well-balanced whole foods diet, right? If you opt to eat this way, please be sure you're being diligent in that you're consuming enough protein and getting the right types of proteins and hitting all the amino acids to meet nutritional requirements. So that's a whole deep dive into a topic that we're not going into today, but please research that and make sure you're meeting your nutritional needs. So when it comes to proteins, right, the things you want to be reaching for and eating a lot of: beef, bison, lamb, chicken, eggs, venison or deer, and organ meats. Okay, that's something that we don't eat a lot of, but that includes a ton of really good nutrients for our bodies. Things that you want to eat in moderation include wild fish and seafood, pork, bacon, pre-soaked beans, full-fat grass-fed dairy, protein powders. Again, I want to make a note that a lot of plant-based protein powders are high in heavy metals, so you want to watch that toxicity load there. So again, these aren't terrible for you. You want to consume them in moderation. And then things you really want to avoid when it comes to protein: fake meats, hot dogs, lunch meats, highly processed meats are not good for you. All right, so moving along to fat. Fat doesn't actually make you fat. In fact, it's extremely essential to our bodies for our hormones, our brain health. When it comes to fat, we want to talk about our ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s. For thousands of years, humans had a 1-to-1 or 1-to-4 ratio of omega-3s to 6s. Today, however, thanks to processed foods, that ratio is 1-to-20 or up to 1-to-50. Unfortunately, most omega-6s that we consume are also oxidized and cause increased inflammation in our bodies. It's also important to note that fat contains more calories per gram than protein and carbs. It contains 9, whereas protein and carbs contain 4. This makes it easy to overconsume calories on a high-fat diet, especially if your internal hunger cues are not working properly. This is one reason to be aware of how much fat you're using to cook your food in as well, right? Do you need a small slab of butter, or do you need a tablespoon of butter to cook your eggs? When it comes to different fats to eat, you want to eat a lot of the fats that our grandparents ate, right? So things like butter, avocado oil, EVU or extra virgin olive oil, lard and tallow, coconut oil, ghee, things that have existed for a long time. Again, in moderation, we want to consume nut butters or raw, unroasted, and unsalted nuts. And then things that we really want to avoid, right? Things that increase inflammation in our bodies, leading to leaky gut, right? Are canola oil, vegetable oil, margarine, Crisco, sunflower oil, palm oil, grapeseed oil, corn oil, peanut oil. Make sure you're checking food labels for these items. You'll find them very commonly in there. Moving right along to carbs, right? I like to call it the great carb debate. Carbohydrates provide us energy, right? Unfortunately, most people overconsume carbs compared to their activity levels. Consuming carbs by themselves are going to provide short-term satiety, right? We're only going to be full for a little bit, and it's going to put us on a blood sugar roller coaster, making it go up and then down further than it was to begin with. So we want to make sure we're consuming carbs with plenty of protein. That'll help prevent that roller coaster ride. Okay? Newsflash, you don't need to eat carbs at every meal, nor should you, unless you're an ultramarathon runner, training for a high, volume activity of some sort. You're dancing for an hour or playing tennis for an hour every single day, right? That's going to increase your carb needs. I also like to point out that it's really interesting that our guts should be able to tolerate some gluten in our diet, right? Unfortunately, a lot of people have become gluten sensitive, right? They experience issues like brain fog, gas, bloating, stomach ache, after eating gluten. This is due to leaky gut and inflammation. Now, celiac disease, or the complete intolerance of gluten, is a completely different thing. That is a genetic thing, but it is not nearly as common as gluten sensitivity that is becoming very prominent in our populations, again, due to inflammation. It's also, of course, important to note what are good carbs to eat and what are ones we should be avoiding. So the ones you want to eat when you need to eat them are sweet potatoes, white rice, quinoa, right? In moderation, we want to have seasonal fruit, okay? That's going to be high in sugar, so we don't want to eat a ton of seasonal fruit. Sourdough bread is also good to eat in moderation, as well as hummus. And then things you want to avoid, brown rice. So a lot of people think this is healthier than white rice. Unfortunately, it tends to have very high levels of arsenic, which we don't want building up in our bodies. And then the rest of the carbs that we want to avoid tend to be very processed, right? Cakes, pastas, pizza, sandwich breads and rolls and buns and bagels and muffins and pancakes and waffles and granola and cereal and things that might sound really tasty. And, you can enjoy them every so often. But if you're eating those on a regular basis, you really want to cut that down because they are highly contributing to the inflammation in your body. All right, eating your peas and carrots. So hopefully you guys like peas and carrots, or at least some variety of fruits and vegetables, because they do add a lot of vitamins and minerals to our diet and usually contain fiber that help keep us full. While they are nutrient rich, they're not usually very dense in those nutrients. So we would have to consume a lot of kale in order to get the good nutrients out of it, or at least to meet our nutritional needs, right? And that's where a lot of proteins, animal proteins, come in because they're really high in a lot of the nutrients as well. Okay, but that doesn't mean we don't want to eat peas and carrots in our fruits and vegetables, right? But just keep in mind that they contain great things, but usually not a big, dense amount of them. Plant foods can also contain anti-nutrients that make them less bioavailable. So we don't always absorb the amount of nutrients that the plant contains. So while it might say that we have 10 grams of vitamin C in the food item, we might only be able to absorb 5 of it. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're paying attention to that as well. I also like to make a note about smoothies. So many people consume smoothies as meals and snacks, thinking that they're healthy. However, most of their smoothie combinations contain a high amount of sugar. You might want to consider adding a quality protein powder to the smoothie to help kind of keep that sugar intake more regulated, right? And also just make sure you're not adding way too many fruits and having a really high sugar content in that smoothie. All right, so eating your peas and carrots. Good fruits and vegetables to eat are listed here, okay? Eat tons of those. I do tend to prefer to eat fruits and vegetables in season, right? You're going to get the maximum amount of nutrients, and it'll also help you naturally rotate through different fruits and vegetables, so we're not eating the same thing over and over again, right? In the list of moderation, right, we're seeing a bunch of different items, and you might be thinking, I don't understand why this fruit or vegetable is good and that one's bad, right? So the in moderation column includes items that tend to be higher in anti-nutrients, okay? Nightshades, like tomatoes, tend to be very high in levels of alkaloids, which increase inflammation in our body. The other ones falling on that list tend to fall under the dirty dozen list, meaning they tend to contain a lot more pesticides in them, and they're harder to clean, and therefore you're consuming more chemicals by eating those. Moving right along to sugar, sweeteners, right? Sugar is sugar is sugar. So, 300 years ago, the average human consumed a few pounds of sugar per year. Today, the average human consumes anywhere from 77 to 152 pounds of sugar per year, right? That means some people might be consuming more than they weigh, or close to what they weigh, right? That's crazy. Sugar is going to light up the same area of your brain as many drugs. That means it can also be just as addictive. Okay? Studies have linked increased sugar intake with increased calorie intake, especially when it comes to beverages. And high sugar containing whole foods like fruit should be consumed in moderation, right? We've already kind of talked about that. If the food you are eating has a label on it, that label should have less than 5 grams of sugar. And we talked about that as well. And again, the very bare minimum, sugar increases inflammation in the body, which is what we're trying to avoid. Okay? Sugar should be heavily limited regardless of what type of sugar it is. On the right-hand side here, I have a picture of the most popular Starbucks drink. It's a grande caramel macchiato, 16 ounces. This drink is 250 calories with 33 grams of sugar. I encourage you to go measure out 33 grams of sugar and see just how much sugar is in that drink. Okay? It's too much sugar to be consuming, especially first thing in the morning or even in the afternoon when your body's going to be getting ready for sleep. So, diving in a little bit more with sugar. Again, all sugar should be in moderation, sweeteners, right? So those ones that you want to consume in moderation are your raw or unrefined cane sugar, seasonal fruits, and your natural sweeteners. So that includes raw honeys, pure maple sugar, backstrap molasses, coconut sugar, fruit sweeteners like applesauce or date paste, stevia, and monk fruit. The ones you really want to avoid are artificial sweeteners. Right? So that's Sweet, Equal, Splenda, Sweet and Low, right? Those contain different types of artificial sweeteners that are basically chemicals. Okay. All sweeteners, whether natural or artificial, are going to at some point begin to alter hormones and impair glucose tolerance. There are ones that don't spike your glucose as much right away, okay, but if you're over consuming sweeteners in general, eventually the chemicals in your body, right, the hormones are going to start deteriorating. You want to consume sugars and sweeteners in moderation. Moving right along to dairy. So again, a healthy gut should be able to tolerate a moderate amount of natural and raw dairy. So it is true that as time has passed, there's a lot of humans that don't have as many lactase enzymes in their bodies, allowing them to digest dairy well. However, a lot of people forget to point out that most of the dairy we're consuming is pasteurized. This idea to sterilize the milk actually kills the enzyme, the naturally occurring lactase enzymes that help us digest the product. So when choosing dairy, choose raw grass-fed dairy sources, whether it's cow, goat, or sheep, and definitely bonus points for looking for heritage breed cows that are A2 genetic tested, right? That's a whole different rabbit hole that we could go down there, but those are going to be the least modified breeds of cows, right? Their milk and products are going to have those naturally occurring lactase enzymes, and we're going to be able to digest those a lot easier. Again, dairy should be consumed in moderation regardless of the quality due to high fat content, therefore high calorie content. So it's really easy to overconsume dairy, a lot like nut butters. So we want to make sure we're paying attention to quantity as well. So here we go again with dairy. Again, good to eat, eating tons of, none, right? We want to eat this in moderation. But the things you want to eat in moderation are raw milk, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, raw cheese, aged cheese, right? Less processed things. We want to make sure we're avoiding pasteurized and uncultured products, and then anything that's advertising fat-free or low-fat dairy, right? They're altering the product. It's not going to be as easily digestible. It's not going to be as healthy for you. Or they're adding more things in there like sugars to make it taste better. And then processed cheese as well. Hydration, right? I love this quote from Paul Chek. The solution to pollution is dilution, right? So if our bodies are toxic, if they have a bunch of stuff that needs flushed out, the best solution to that is to dilute it and drink lots of water. Okay? We should be consuming half our body weight in ounces per day of plain spring water. So if you weigh 200 pounds, you should be drinking 100 ounces of plain spring water every single day. If you exercise a lot, you should be consuming more. Okay? Also note that 120 ounces is a whole gallon of water, so most people should be drinking close to a gallon of water per day. We want to remove sugary drinks and alcohol from our diets, right? They're increasing inflammation and calorie intake without providing us any nutrition. You may want to consider adding electrolytes. We really like the LMNT brand to your water to make it more hydrating and tasty if you have trouble making sure that you're getting enough water in your diet. We also want to limit our consumption of coffee and tea, right? Drinking those plain is great in moderation. But again, a lot of people add a lot of sugar and chemically concocted things to them. If you can't drink black coffee, try a little bit of grass-fed half and half as a creamer. That can taste really good. And then also check the quality of your local tap water. right? There's a website here that you can go on and look at your local tap water reports. You might be really not so happy with what's in your tap water, so I really do encourage you to drink spring water. So yes, drinking lots of spring water in moderation, black tea, black coffee, green teas, herbal teas, right? Again, just make sure you're not adding a bunch of sugar to them. And then things to avoid, right? All those fancy marketed products on the shelves that are trying to convince you that they're healthy, but I'm sorry, they're not. Fruit juices, if they are, plain squeezed orange juice, apple juice, right? Again, could be considered in moderation, but they're going to be very high in sugar, so you got to watch that sugar intake. But a lot of fruit punches, sugary coffees, sodas, iced teas, alcohols, energy drinks, sports drinks, most of them contain a lot of things that are not good for you, are going to increase inflammation, and should be avoided. All right, salt. Salt is a very important topic I want to make sure I covered as well. Salt is a primary electrolyte in our tissues and body fluids. We need it to function properly. The problem isn't salt itself. The problem in modern diets is the high levels of manufactured sodium chloride in processed and packaged foods. When we're eating a mostly healthy whole foods diet, it is important to make sure we're salting our foods to maintain proper mineral balance. When choosing a salt, you want to go with something like Celtic salt, a sea salt for daily use. It's okay to have kosher salt on hand for cooking recipes, stews and soups, things like that. But your average normal salting your food, you're going to want to use a sea salt. Himalayan rock salt is very popular. However, that tends to be very high in heavy metals due to the collection process of that salt. So I do tend to shy away from Himalayan salts. How food is cooked. This is also really important, okay? Because you can eat healthy food and then cook it and destroy the nutrients, and then you're not eating healthy food, right? So how we prepare food and cook it can actually change or damage the nutrient properties and therefore how healthy it is. When you cook your food at home, it's going to be the best option, right? It's most likely going to mean the less amount of calories in it because you're able to control the amount and types of oils you're cooking it in. The vast majority of food that is made outside the home is cooked in vegetable and canola oil, which, as we've discussed multiple times, is unhealthy. It increases inflammation in our bodies. Again, going through what type of cooking should I do? Right? You mostly want to be baking, steaming, sauteing, roasting, slow cookers, Instapots, things that are lower heat. Yes, it's going to take a little longer, but it's worth waiting to not damage the nutrients in your food, right? Things you want to do in moderation: grilling, smoking, broiling, air frying, fermenting. And then things you really want to avoid as much as you possibly can are fast foods, microwaving, deep frying, prepackaged foods. So at this point, you might be asking the question, what do I eat? Don't worry, I have you covered. I do want to take a dive into the new food pyramid, right, that debuted in 2026. It looks very different from the old pyramid. If you've been listening to my presentation, taking notes, you're going to see that the new food pyramid kind of jives with what I'm saying, right? And I've been saying and giving this presentation for quite a few years before these dietary guidelines came out. Right? The biggest thing to note is that we want to eat mostly, fruits, vegetables, meats, dairy, good quality fats in higher quantities than the whole grains, right? Which is honestly like the flip side of what we've been being taught and what I learned in elementary school. Right? And without further delay, here is a great list of different things you can be eating. Hopefully this inspires you and encourages you. I'm going to give you some time on each slide here that you can pause it, write things down, and start making good changes to your diet. Again, here's some lunch ideas and some dinner ideas to inspire you. Here's what an entire day of healthy eating might look like. And here is another day of example. And don't hesitate to make swaps. If you don't like carrots or you don't like sauerkraut, swap that out with something else. Okay? Make these things that you want to eat. And here's another day of, again, putting together different ideas from those initial lists in what a full day of healthy eating might look like. All right, so now I want to take some time to talk about quality. Quality in food does matter. Okay, but I also realize your budget matters too. So higher quality foods have higher quality nutrients. There are scientific studies that prove that the nutrient profile in grass-fed beef differs and is healthier for you than conventional raised beef, right? Unfortunately, a lot of the grass-fed and organic foods are better for you, but they do tend to be more expensive. So I want to note that while you should aim for as high quality food as you can afford, right? Don't break the bank, but prioritize ahead of quality everything we've already talked about, right? Focus more on eating the whole foods, right, than eating the grass-fed beef, right? If all you can afford is conventional beef, that's still better than eating a processed hot dog or McDonald's, right? We can also mention eggs, right? Eggs can be really confusing. You can see my little chart here from worst to best. Again, I know that these can, price-wise, can range wildly, so do the best that you can to get the best quality food that you are able to. I also want to reiterate the importance of consistency. Our bodies replace every cell within itself every 7 years, right? And we're using the food that we eat to rebuild those cells and rebuild those tissues. So we're literally becoming what we eat, right? I want you to review this presentation and meet yourself where you're at. Don't beat yourself up over the things that you didn't know before, and make changes slowly, right? Finish eating all the things that you have, right? If you aren't able to just go out and replace it all, that's fine. Just when you go to replace it, pick a healthier version. Use the tips and tricks in this presentation to help you choose healthier things. Remember, absolute perfection is not possible. I promise you, no one has it together all the time. And trying to do your best and making slow incremental changes is going to get you the best results in the end. Okay. I also like my little flow chart here of eliminate, replace, and reduce. Okay, that can really help take some stress out of this. If at first you can't eliminate a product, right? Let's use your morning coffee. Okay, you can't eliminate that sugary coffee, that you need that. Try replacing it with something healthier. Okay, can you swap out the creamer for grass-fed half and half? If you cannot, and you must have that coffee, see if you can't reduce the amount you consume it. Maybe only have it 3 days a week instead of 7. Okay, try and go through that with all the different things that you're consuming on a regular basis. And last but not least, I want to wrap up this presentation leaving you with this quote, something to think about. It's from Diana Rogers. She says, "Food isn't just fuel. It can either improve or damage your health." So are the things that you're eating improving or damaging your health? Right? Hopefully this presentation has helped you evaluate that and given you plenty of inspiration on how to start making better choices. Thank you.